Welcome back to Coast Vue. Listen, I really enjoyed that conversation with Mayor Kenny Holloway from Ocean Springs. Ocean Springs is on fire. And if you missed that incredible conversation, go back and go to the SuperTalk Gulf Coast Facebook page or the SuperTalk YouTube page or your favorite podcast and just do a search Coast Vue. And I talk about some of the most, some of the incredible conversations I've had with young entrepreneurs who are making serious investments in Ocean Springs. Hey, listen, it wasn't long ago I was watching SuperTalk TV and just happened to cross a conversation between a young man by the name of Austin Golding and Paul Gallo. And I was super impressed with Austin. He's the president and CEO of Golding Barge Line. And it caused me to go do a little search on his history. He's third generation. His dad's had some success over the years, had a company, sold the company, started a company back again. And now as the president and CEO, Austin's taken the company to places I guess maybe his dad never dreamed he would take it. But it's cool to see young people do amazing things. But they had a great conversation about the global oil market, and because of what his company does, what Austin's company does, very specifically as it relates to refined petroleum products, petrochemicals, and other chemical products that derive from oil. I thought it'd be good to have a conversation with him about sort of the state of affairs that we're in today. So without any further ado, let me welcome Austin Golding to the conversation. How you doing, Austin?
Oh, great, Ricky. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for the introduction. I don't deserve it. I really appreciate that.
Well, you grew up in the business, man, and it's cool to see again a third generation. I actually went to your website, could see a picture of your grandfather sitting behind the wheel of a boat. It's in your blood, isn't it?
It is. You know, we trace our roots back to Greenville, Mississippi, to a time where there was probably 24 towboat companies in and around that area. And as we moved down to Vicksburg for our second enterprise, it's been a multi-generational affair. It's a passion of my family's business. But like we say, you know, who else wants to fill an investment full of petroleum and petrochemicals and people and float it down the Mississippi River? So you almost got to be born into it to jump into our game. But we're passionate about it, and people and safety come first, and the business seems to follow in right behind that.
What's interesting about what you're doing is that you have really worked hard to find your competitive advantage, and you've really refined your capabilities, and people rely on you guys because you're a low cost provider. There's such a thing in the work in the world that you're in. But why don't you give people a sense of what Golding Barge Line is all about?
Sure. So we move gasoline, diesel, petrochemicals, anything that's a feedstock that goes into what we use every day post-refinery. So once they take the crude oil, they run it through the refinery. They either got to load it into a rail system, a pipeline, or some kind of maritime system. We're the maritime piece that runs inland. So we run in all of lower Mississippi, upper Mississippi, Ohio River, all from the ICW from Brownsville, Texas, all the way to Panama City, Florida, into Oklahoma, through Alabama on the 10-time, you name it. If we can draft 9 feet of water, we'll go. And so we're usually the piece between a refinery and a truck rack or a rail rack that goes right to your gas station, a refinery and another refinery that are making a certain product. They both are trading, different products to, usually as a selling point, they'll trade those. And then the actual trading arms that don't own refineries, they just own storage facilities. And they'll buy it, flip it, wait for the price to change, blend it to make it into something else. And then we'll carry it, what they call FOB or delivered. They'll charter us to kind of deliver it to who they sold to. But recently, a lot of what we've been moving is going into plastic products. A lot of the chemicals that go to cut the plastic down, and they make it into small pellets, and they ship it all over the world. So we also move a little rock. And one of the Coast favorite companies, Warren Paving, is a customer of ours. So do a little business with Mississippi, and we're Chevron's largest clean products carrier out of Pascagoula. So we're down in y'all's neck of the woods a lot. It's a great, really burgeoning part of our business.
Well, listen, I talk about it a lot on the show, but, we're lucky in coastal Mississippi because you have Chevron and Ingalls. I call them one of the bookmarks. And then on the other side of the coast, we have Stennis Space Center as the other bookmark. And in between, we have hospitality and gaming and all the things that are happening. We're truly an economic engine for the state. But when you consider the role that certainly Ingalls plays, it goes way beyond that. And when you consider the role that Chevron plays, it goes way beyond that. Chevron is actually very significant, isn't it, Austin?
Oh, it's huge. That people don't understand, that refinery is absolutely enormous, and it supplies not only Chevron with fuel, but also multiple major oil companies buy products from Chevron there because of how strategic that refinery is. There aren't many on this side of New Orleans that have the ability to load ships internationally, especially to the barrel a day count that refinery is pushing. So it's a big, big piece of the refinery puzzle in this country in a very strategic location. So, I think that gasoline isn't the only product coming out of there. They're making diesel for the world. They're making chemicals that go into making your dashboard and your car, to the bag of chips that you're going to have for lunch today. So it's a very dynamic facility as well.
How I get a sense of the volume. Of course, as the former publisher of the Sun Herald, I had opportunities to go to Chevron. I've flown over it in a helicopter. I've gone offshore to see how all that process works. But I do a lot of offshore fishing, and when you see those super tankers come into the Gulf and then they download to these other tankers and they're standing and literally waiting in lines to go download their product. I mean, it is a machine, dude, of massive amounts of product going in and out of there, isn't it?
Oh, it is, and the engineering that goes into it is fascinating. The way that we're able to get it around the world through these facilities and into our cars for what we do, and into our products for what we do. I mean, it's a marvel in efficiency, and like we've seen, whenever you have a disruption, and that efficiency counts on kind of compounding effects, and it's like a Jenga puzzle. You take one piece out, and the whole thing can be disrupted. So, especially when it's under pressure like it is now. I think that's what we're seeing is a system is kind of taxing itself to rise to the challenge of meeting, a gap in the supply chain, which would be Russian oil or Russian products even.
So before we get to Russia, because that's obviously the most interesting, the most important geopolitical issue that's happening right now. Think of just at a very, very high level. I think of the oil markets and it's a global market. It's OPEC is impacting it, non-OPEC companies are impacting it, but it's at the core, it's a lot about supply and demand. And we'll come back to, we were already in sort of a tenuous situation coming out of the pandemic as it relates to supply and demand. We'll come back to that in a second. And then, of course, most recently, the geopolitical issues related to Russia is a big issue. But I think a great way to start is simply, as you mentioned about Chevron, in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit coastal Mississippi, it was a supply disruption almost immediately coming from Chevron having been hit by Hurricane Katrina. And it affected the global markets, didn't it?
Oh, it did. What people really, the straight line between more oil drilling and production and cheaper gas at the pump, there is a line there, but it's not a straight line. One of the more interesting things to think about is most of the crude that comes from these places internationally is very heavy crude that requires heat. It's hard to handle. When you process it, you get more of the asphalts and the lubes and some of the low end stuff. But you also get a lot of the high end, different refining components. Now, the crude that we frack and we get here has the consistency of diesel. It's a lot easier to handle. It doesn't require heat, and we get a lot of light ends out of it. All right, so you take that. That's your two source materials. If it's cheaper for these companies to make something here and send it internationally and make a higher margin, they're going to do it. They're internationally positioned to do that. They're not just going to sell that product here because there's some patriotic line item in their budget. It's not. They're beholden to the shareholder and to the investor, not this country. Now, we all hope that there's some allegiance here, but the fact is we make a lot of the world's diesel here. We make a lot of the world's really capable octane boosters, such as naphthas, reformates, rafformates. We make a lot of the world's plastics here. A lot of the ethylene and the polyurethane and the xylenes, the toluenes, those chemicals are made and refined here. And then they're put on ships and go around the world. Okay, you want that not to happen, but you want it all to go into domestic gasoline production. It's just not going to happen directly. Now, if the cost of the source material goes down, you would hope that would be passed on to the rest of the production just through the supply and demand scale, and it does. But You're not just going to have a light switch where you say, let's get more oil in these refineries and make more gasoline. It's got to make sense for them. And they got to replace something else in that process with that domestic gasoline to make that decision.
Yeah, and also the more that I have read about it to try to understand it more, is, the reality is we don't solve. It's too often we simplify the issue by saying America needs to become energy independent. There's really no such thing as true energy independence given the global connectivity that you just talked about.
Exactly. And I think the biggest thing that people need to remember, we have the best, for lack of a better term, kitchen for refining oil in the world. We're making some of the most high-end products in the world here that produce a very high margin for these companies. So gasoline is not the only thing coming out of these facilities, but even the gasoline we make is at a higher grade and a more versatile grade than a lot of the rest of the world can make. So yes, I mean, we are the global supplier, and to be independent, we're beyond independent. We help the world have energy independence, not just America.
So when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Austin Golding, and I want to get more specifically into, we were coming out of the pandemic. There were big issues about supply and demand coming out of the pandemic. So we added another variable in the midst of what was already a market that had some instability in it as it relates to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We'll start to kind of break all that down after we come back from break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. We're having a conversation with someone who I had the opportunity to see on Paul Gallo's show not long ago, Austin Golding. He's the president and CEO of Golding Barge Line. He's sitting on the Mississippi River as we speak, and he has barges literally all over the place carrying different grades and parts of the process of petroleum products all over the United States. He's super engaged in the entire United States inland waterway system. And as a result of the fact that he's sort of this go-between, he's in a great position to really understand where the global markets are these days. Okay, before Russia came along, before this current instability occurred, we were already in a weird place because of the pandemic, weren't we, Austin?
Oh, we were. And I think even if you want to get specific to our part of the supply chain, volumes plummeted when COVID hit. And not only that, you had a new administration come in that may not have been as oil friendly as the previous one. So you had refiners divesting their refining positions, shutting refineries down. Different parts of the supply chain shrunk. And so now when you have a tightening, it's not the same supply chain as we had before COVID because people had to react to COVID. And so I know that that's echoed to a lot of different sectors, but in our sector, you saw refineries be sold and refineries be shut down, and a lot of players left even our space and the privatized infrastructure side on the transportation side. So we're not as robust as we used to be, and COVID was part of that exacerbation for sure.
Well, what's interesting about that is that the petroleum industry was hit just like everybody else was hit, whether it be a restaurant or any business. Every single business was hit in some way. So your ability to turn on the dime is less than what it was before. You factor into that the instability that's created by trying to ramp supply back up again to meet the current demand, the issues of some major companies not investing in exploration, but instead investing in alternative energy sources. I mean, it gets complicated fast, doesn't it?
It does. And look, I've always said we want there to be a sustainability equation in our business too. We're looking for the most fuel efficient engines. We understand that becoming greener is a really good thing to talk about and a goal to have out in the future. Now, how do we talk about getting there without disrupting our supply chain? I think there's a process that has to go into place. And I think maybe we need to look at it, like you said, from an optionality standpoint, rather than a complete light switch style scenario. It's great to have options. It makes us even less dependent on things that can strangle us like this. So we're all about embracing those options. And we hope that this kind of raises the purview that we don't need to just completely abandon our previous investments for the new shiny ones. Maybe we can hold hands and figure out how to create a more stable market.
Yeah, Austin, I think that everyone buys into the reality that we have to protect the environment. And over time, we will, get to cleaner energy sources. The question is, and as you put, I like the way you said it, the flipping the switch, I mean, the more complex something is, and this is certainly complex, the more you should have more of an implementation strategy that gives you the chance to have a smooth transition from one to the next. But what you get when you get a new administration, going from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration, one that has renewable energies as a major goal, what they do is in the wake of the pandemic, with all the things that you just mentioned, they add a bunch of more variables to the conversation by increasing the amount of regulation or decreasing capacity in one way or another or whatever, and it just makes what's already a volatile situation even more volatile. And then Russia happens.
Yeah.
And probably some of the most significant instability we've seen in a long time.
Totally. And I think the key with Russia that people have to realize, because you're going to get the Facebook talking points, as I call them, where they can pick things that try to get you excited or mad or whatever, however you want to class that. But you have to think, we don't get a lot of crude oil from Russia. We don't get a lot of finished products from Russia relative to our total consumption rate. But the rest of the world does. And so when their supply is disrupted, they start pulling from our supply. And our supply is going to be disrupted directly. But other parts of the world is going to be disrupted even more drastically. So it puts a strain on the whole system. So don't think, well, they're blowing smoke at me about how dependent we are on Russia or not. It's you got to understand that we're a part of a global economy, especially in the energy piece. That's why you've got to go to places like OPEC, Venezuela, off the coast of Nigeria, places that aren't exactly friendly places to get this stuff, because people hold on to it dearly, and they know the rest of the world needs it, not just the country it's being mined in. So the Russian information is a very complex set of details to come out of. Personally, I think we can find other options, and we can put pressure on them without having to pay too much of a price here at home. But it's not as easy as people would lead you to believe. But it's also, we're not as independent of Russia as some people may shrug off and say, well, we can do it. We're not that tied in with them. That's not exactly the case.
It's complex. It's a global market. The entire market. It will move based on supply. It will move based on demand. There's a lot of breakdown of both of those. It will move based on the geopolitical situation. It is there's at the end of the day, what the global markets, what was happening at the global level determines the price of gas that we're going to ultimately pay here in America. And we've really only begun to scratch the surface. So Austin, we're out of time for today, but what I want to do, I mean, you're a very articulate and impressive young man. I look forward to circling back with you and continuing the conversation and breaking it down even more. But I appreciate what you offered to the show today, my friend.
Yeah, Ricky, thanks. And look, we love Mississippi. We love being here. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to coming back for sure.
This has been Austin Golding, the president and CEO of Golding Barge Line Company. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.